I want to talk about two different battlefronts today. Two different battlefronts that men face, individually and collectively. In the first instance, I want to talk about the war within. Over the years, I've received comments and quite a number of messages from men who were angry at me. They were angry at me because I burst their bubble. I took away their fantasy. And for some reason, they found themselves in the position that they just couldn't go back. They couldn't return. What is this? And who are these men? Well, we've all seen the film The Matrix. It's been over-talked about, overdone in the manosphere, but yeah, there's this character, Cypher. He wants to go back. He wants to go back to the Matrix. He wants to eat synthetic steak. He wants to forget about everything. The problem with these men who write to me in angry tones, and any man who secretly harbors these feelings, the problem is that you can't go back. There is no return to the Matrix. Unlike the film, there's no return there. And the deception that you wreak upon yourself is far worse than the fantasy. And let me tell you why. You see, human discourse is rife with all sorts of idiotic maxims. One of them you'll hear all the time is that ignorance is bliss. It's one of the dumbest things human beings have come up with. Ignorance is bliss. Quite the opposite. Ignorance is great pain. Ignorance is suffering. Just look at the past. Look at humanity's past. Look at what we did to people because they were epileptics, or because the crops failed, or for whatever reason. Ignorance is suffering. It's not bliss. And to the extent that it seems like bliss, it's only bliss until the bubble is popped, until that fantasy, that plastic fantasy is popped. And you men who are angry at yourself, at me, at the world, you find yourself transitioning. You're an in-betweener, I suppose, I might call you. And your bubble's been popped. Your ignorance wasn't bliss, it was suffering. Not knowing something, not knowing how to treat a wound, not knowing the etiology of a disease, not knowing cause and effect, that's suffering. That is ignorance. It is not bliss. You only thought you were blissful. And the fragility of your blissfulness, or rather your alleged blissfulness, the fragility of that is to be found in your current pain. Because, as I said, quite the opposite. One of those stupid maxims, ignorance isn't bliss, it's suffering, it's hurt, it's pain, and that's where you find yourself in right now. If you still harbor those feelings towards me, towards the world, towards yourself, that is the war within. And I've been there many moons ago. I remember first realizing these things, and then slowly internalizing them, as if walking about the street in the city had somehow become akin to sitting in a theater watching a piece of drama. You look to the stage and you think, where are the actors? By contrast, you look around you in the audience, in the seats, and what do you see? You see marionettes. You don't know where the puppeteer is, though. You see the strings. You see them moving about. You don't even know why they're moving about. They don't know why they're moving about, why they're gibbering and jabbering and blathering, why they're saying things, how they're saying things. It's all unknown. But you know they're marionettes, and you know that somewhere out there there's a puppeteer. You just don't understand who he is, or what he is, or what it is. And you feel like an alien. Because you are now. You're slowly severing the strings, and you're slowly becoming less of a marionette. The marionettes appear happy, just like the people in the Matrix did. And just like the people in the Matrix, it's true, they will fight to preserve that image. They don't know what you're talking about. You're just the crazy guy. I was there too. I remember. But you have to remember if these indeed be marionettes, how easy is it to cut string? You just take a scissor, snip, the puppeteer is gone, the marionette is released. You are that marionette, and what do you have left? Now you see the point. Now you see the fragility of the fantasy that you were harboring. Now you see it. Ignorance is bliss. Foolish. Folly. Ignorance is just pain. Now, it might be, for most human beings, that the fantasy, men, women, whatever they are, is a requirement for living. In fact, I'm rather convinced of that. But if you're an in-betweener, if you're transitioning, if you're still angry, if you feel like I've burst your bubble, literally or figuratively, you're not one of those people. If it were so easy just to doze off and go back to that fantasy that you were once in, you would have done it by now. And I wasn't the cause. I wasn't the prime mover. Hey, I'm just a guy who makes videos. You just had enough sense in your head, in your soul, figuratively speaking, to recognize that something was amiss. You saw what Shakespeare said a long time ago, that all the world's a stage, and the men and women merely actors playing on it. The difference being, these actors are being pulled by the puppeteer to do things. What is that puppeteer? Well, it's not a he, it's not a she, it's an it. Kind of like Stephen King's It, right? It's a oftentimes ominous force, or it's not an ominous force. It's whatever you want to call it, but those guttural instincts that we all react to and react based on and act upon, yeah, that's the puppeteer. Our origins, our evolutionary origins, harking back millions of years, perhaps even billions in the case of single-celled organisms. The puppeteer is the autopilot. And maybe, just maybe, you've moved one step closer to going in semi-automatic mode as opposed to automatic mode. Maybe you're in semi-automatic pilot. Maybe you're not on either. But you can't be a cipher in this world. It doesn't, no matter how much you want to go back there. Because it's a ticking bomb. You see, the fantasy that men harbor, and indeed people in general, women, men, it doesn't really matter. That fantasy, that bubble, that plastic bubble, perhaps it's made out of paper mache, you can just pop it. It's a ticking bomb. It's a time bomb. It's not a question of if the bubble will burst. It's a question of when. It's a question of when. And you want proof in the pudding to see that ignorance isn't bliss, but rather suffering. Look at the people whose bubble is burst, but have no recourse to reality and truth and evidence, and trying to understand the world around them themselves. Look at how they wallow in their filthy ignorance, in their benightedness. They know nothing. They suffer even more. All you see is emotional outbursts. All you see is suffering. And eventually they recover, I suppose, and they get back to the bubble, and it bursts again and again and again, and then they die. So, a life of periodic, quote-unquote, bliss, ignorance, allegedly, and suffering. Always without understanding. But you, man, you are different in this respect. So, I encourage you to be angry at me, though I was not the prime mover, I was not the cause. I have too little influence and too little power to do that. I'm just a guy who makes videos. No, it was your own mind, your own soul, in recognition of things around you. You woke up in that theater, you saw the audience were the actors, you saw the audience were the marionettes. The stage was empty. There was no one on the stage. And you were angry, or you might be angry now. Whatever pain you might experience now, that is the last bursting of the bubble. You need never suffer again in this way. And I'm willing to bet money you won't. It's quite simple, the reason why. Ignorance is suffering. You're no longer ignorance. The embodiment of ignorance, which is the fantasy. You were ignorance. People running around in that bubble, be they men or women, be it religious, be it romantic, whatever. These people are ignorance. And hence they are also suffering. That's the war within. Remember, cliche as it is to refer to Fight Club, what Tyler Durden says. Our war is a spiritual war. And to the extent that we can call anything spiritual, that's true. Too many distractions, too many things preventing you from getting at the truth. But here you are, finally. That is the war within. The war without, I think the war without's a bit more complicated, actually. The war within is simple, just have your bubble burst, no longer be ignorant, no longer suffer, move on. That's all internal. The war without's trickier. It's much more complicated. Why? Well. As many as you know, John the Other, a while back, was kicked off of AVFM, and we've come to expect this kind of behavior from High Lord Tyrant Paul Elam. Whatever good he's done for men in the past has been quite effectively vitiated by his actions over the last few years. And we know as well that a woman has been put in charge of the media outlet at AVFM. And I don't really know too much about this Janet person. And to be honest, I don't really care. I did hear some of the things she said. And the war without, it used to be simpler, right? The war without used to be, fighting quote-unquote feminism or fighting quote-unquote gynocentrism. But the problem with, and let's not call it feminism, the problem with gynocentrism is it is that slithery serpent, isn't it? It seeps into every nook and cranny. And to say that AVFM has not been infected by gynocentrism is to say that the world is flat. It's been there for quite some time. Never mind the politically correct pandering bullshit that they've been going on about for ages now. Now, whatever neutral position I might have had towards so-called MRAs or AVFM, I have to change that after the events of the past few months. I don't wish them success. I wish them abysmal failure. In fact, if this is the course they're going to take, if Paul Elam, for example, whom I used to be neutral about, even after he decided to spit on me, and he did apologize, but that was only because of collective pressure, if he decides to throw his, or rather, decide to throw his right-hand man, John the Other, whom I always respected for his candor, even if I didn't always find his material particularly interesting, throw his right-hand man to the street corner, to the gutter, so he can, over a disagreement, on a whim. And we've seen, for example, the face of Paul Elam in this regard. He's just a politician. He's a manipulative turncoat politician. And if he's the face of AVFM, I really want nothing to do with these guys, and I hope they fail abysmally. I hope they fail. But this is the war without. It used to be just combating gynocentrism. It used to be pretty clear, but now, even in the so-called men's rights movement, it's just infected by gynocentrism, infected by politically correct bullshit. And this is the reason I've never called myself a men's rights activist. It's ludicrous. You see, the reality is, man, the truth, and I hate using that term, the truth, because people like Stefan Moyo abuse it all the time. But the truth is simple. There are no advocates of men. I'm not an advocate for men. I'm an advocate for you doing whatever the fuck you want. Now, you might happen to be a man, but no one's going to advocate for men collectively in an organized fashion, because what happens, as we've seen with AVFM, is we get that kind of bullshit. We see what happens when it reaches that point. Political bickering, infighting, and the fear of offense. Now, of course, many of you remember the good old days, right? The happy misogynists. You see, he didn't care back then. Now he cares. I'm never going to care about that because being politically correct, because I'm not an MRA. I'm not trying to organize someone. I'm not trying to get attention from mass public. It doesn't interest me. And that's the problem. You see, the very nature of the male, of man, is such that he needs to get at the truth. He needs to tap into that veracity. He needs to understand the world. And when you're pursuing politically correct bullshit, right, you can't do that. There's a blockade. There are no advocates for men. They don't exist. For one, men just don't have that collective willpower that women do. We don't just band together. And when we do, you can see what happens. You get thrown under the bus by their fellow men. John the Other, of course, for quite some time now, no longer been part of AVFM. And basically over an argument about tradcons and combating traditional conservatism within the men's rights movement and at large. Now, it's often mistaken or misunderstood, at least on my part or towards me, that I oppose traditional conservatism because it's obsolete and doesn't work anymore. Well, that's nominally true. It's minimally true. That's not my issue with traditional conservatism. It is true, certainly, in the mechanized world that traditional conservatism can no longer exist. It can no longer persevere in the state that it used to because the environment has changed such that it just doesn't allow it and won't allow it. But that's not the main issue. The main issue, my main beef, if you will, with traditional conservatism is it tells men what the fuck to do. And I am a strong believer in what Barbarossa said, that in male entropy, men branching out into a million different directions. What tradcons want to do, be they men or women, is tell men, you have to do this, you have to do it this way, and if you don't, there's something wrong. Now, any infection of this sort, that is, the tradcon infection, say within men's rights, it's, I would argue, impossible to erase, to extirpate. It's there, and it's too late. You can't get rid of it. Now, it's funny that guys in AVFM claim to be somehow authorities on men going their own way. I'm not an authority on men going their own way. They're going to, publish a book, this, that. Yeah, I mean, these are the guys who have tradcons major tradcons representing them to the public. The guys who threw out John the Other, who was a stark opponent of traditional conservatism, and rightly so, just because he opposed traditional conservatism, basically. Now, of course, AVFM, guys, they would say I'm misrepresenting them. I don't have a fucking clue what I'm talking about. It doesn't really matter. I don't give a fuck. I'm not part of a political organization. I'm just telling you like it is. The war without, gentlemen, is a lot more complicated than the war within. So once you pass that barrier, once you get past the marionettes, you see what the puppeteer is, what it is, it becomes a lot more complicated because all these people know what's going on. You think the people mired in politically correct bullshit don't know the reality of the situation? They're just kind of teetering on the brink. They're afraid. People like Fiedelbogen, people like Esme, people like Elam, all these guys who just insist on being politically correct for fear of offense. They're not dumb. They know what's going on, but they don't want to offend. The problem is, in this world for men, we can't afford not to be offensive. Now, if by offensive is meant, of course, that we're hurting people's feelings because they don't like the facts that we put forth or the evidence that we bring forth, well, then offense is inevitable, and it has to be. There are no advocates for men. They're just men out there doing their own thing. And I think AVFM has showed itself to be an absolute failure in advocating for men's rights. They haven't gotten shit done. All they do is bicker and fight amongst themselves, and they spit on and throw on their own guys who work hard for them, people like John the Other and others. It's incredible. It really is. No, this is much more complicated, the war without. The war within is easy. It's internal. But there might not be too much difference between the war within and the war without at the end of the day. Like I said, there is no organization for MGTOW. There are no advocates for men. We're just guys doing whatever the fuck we want. and that's how it should be. The problem with traditional conservatism is not that it's obsolete, which it is, not that it just doesn't fit into the modern world, which it doesn't. The problem with it is it puts restrictions on men and tells them you have to do this and you have to do that. And women who advocate for this, and it's been said a million times, they're phony, they're transparent, and it's quite obvious what they want. It's only, and quite, as I said, quite frankly, if AVFM is the face of men's rights, I wish men's rights an abysmal failure, and I hope they fail utterly. That's my honest wish. We've done, people who make videos, random people, a lot more for men on the internet, informing men, telling them to go their own way, telling them to do their own thing, on their own terms, more than any political organization ever has. Men have woken up. They're waking up. And quite frankly, the war without, I say, who gives a fuck? I've said before, to some degree, this is a war of attrition, and I guess it is. A whittling of the ranks? Well, so-called MRAs, they're out the window for me. Not after these latest episodes with AVFM, I mean, a total joke. And now they're bringing out some book or some pamphlet on men going their own way. It's a fucking joke. I wouldn't do that. I'm not an authority on men going. I just make videos. I'm just a dude who makes videos. Now, it's just my opinion, and I think a lot of my subscribers share this opinion, but, I mean, AVFM, fuck AVFM. Fuck men's rights activists. They're a fucking joke. To throw a guy out under the bus, like John the Other, like I said, whose candor I always respected, who was spot on so many issues, and particularly with regards to traditional conservatism. I mean, it's just incredible. But that's the nature of war. External war, at least, the war without, right? Turncoats everywhere, quislings everywhere, don't know who to trust, deception. I don't want to take part in that. To the extent that there is a war without with ideas, I gladly take part of that, because ideas are neutral in a sense. Ideas exist on their own. We can talk about them, we can discuss the evidence, but all this political bickering and schmoozing and all of this shit, it just doesn't interest me. And quite, it's my opinion, I don't think it should interest you going your own way. So, as I said, internally, there's a journey to be taken, no doubt. And some of you have been there for a while. Some of you have yet to make that journey. Some of you are in-betweeners. But externally, once you wake up and you see all of this stuff going around, you see MGTOW, you see MRAs, you see women being involved in the men's rights movement, and this and that, I mean, it's fucking confusing. What I say to all of that is, fuck all of them, and do your own fucking thing. I'm not advocating for you. I'm advocating for you doing whatever the fuck you want with your life. Fuck traditional conservatism. Fuck liberalism. Fuck everything. Just do your own thing. Go your own way. Fuck men's rights. Fuck activism. Do your own thing. Be your own man. At the end of the day, that's all you got. And that's the only thing that's going to change in this fucking world, is you being your own guy, you being your own man, doing your own thing. You're not going to change the world, men, but you can change your own lives, and that's what counts. That's all I got to say. Peace out.